Mother Maria Skobtsova, and talking about her today is quite extraordinary because she passed away on the 31st of March in 1945 in the concentration camp. For some reason, my slides don't. Oh, yeah. So she was born Elizaveta Pilenka in Russia, in Riga, which is modern Latvia now, and passed as a martyr in Ravensbrück concentration camp in Germany. She was arrested, saving Jews under the Nazi occupation. She became a nun in exile and became Mother Maria Skobtsova, and in 2006 she was canonized. She was a poet, mingling in the circles of Silver Age poetical circles. Bloch was one of her admirations and connections. She was still a theologian. Father Sergei Bulgakov was one of her confessors. And here is the picture when she was yet not a nun, and with the philosopher Nikolai Berdyaev on the left. She was also a philosopher herself, and she had a long-standing friendship with Berdyaev. She is known to sit under the stairs with her legs in a leg warming bath. And the reason she lived under the stairs is she gave up her room for the refugees, and she was smoking a cigar and discussing philosophy with Berdyaev. She was also a mayor of Anapa in her pre-exile time. She ended up being an Orthodox nun under the spiritual guidance of Metropolitan Evlogi. On top of all other gifts, she was an artist. She painted icons and drawings and paintings. She also did an embroidery, and the one down on this slide, this particular one is very significant. She embroidered it in the concentration camp. People working in the camp were stealing threads for her and bringing it for her, and they've heard the rumors about Normandy invasion. And this particular embroidery, the tapestry, she did representing the Normandy invasion, which the rumors circulated in the camp. She also did liturgical vestments, and here you could see Father Sergei Hakel carrying these liturgical vestments that she made, and he was serving in them. And of course, the figure of Father Sergei Hakel is crucially important. He was her major biographer, and I think he is the one who submitted the documents and applications for her canonization. And her book, The Pearl of Great, his book, The Pearl of Great Price, is most inspirational and talking about her life. And of course, she was a martyr together with Father Dmitry Klipinin. They were producing the fake baptismal certificates for Jews so that they won't be martyred. So today I will be discussing her autobiographical poem, which in a way carried a lot of prophetic vision about her life and her death. It's one of the latest of her poems, and it's written on the Day of the Spirit, hence the name of the poem, Duhov Den, which is literally translated as the Day of the Spirit. She wrote it in the occupied Paris, pre her arrest, on the 25th of May 1942, on Monday following Pentecost. The title of the poem, as I already said, could be translated as Day of the Spirit. And there are some references to the spirit in the poem. And its living spirit is called living spirit, life-giving dove, double-edged sword, paraclete, comforter, or suffering white bird covered with blood. And we'll be discussing all that. The major themes of the poems are sorrows, troubles, and tribulations. And she brings a very powerful and poetic description of the tragedies, pain, cry, and sorrow, not only of the world, but the person in it, or the prophet in it, and more importantly, the spirit in it. And she also represents the suffering and tribulations of the time and the history, which makes this poem very relevant even today. There is a mystery of a double-edged sword, which is also a cross and a human nature. She writes already earlier in 1939 in her article about imitating Mother of God the following: the cross is lifted freely, meaning actively, by the Son of Man, but the sword strikes, cleaving the soul that accepts it. The cross of the Son of Man, freely accepted, becomes a double-edged sword that pierces the soul of the mother, not because she chooses it freely, but because she cannot help but suffer the suffering of the Son. And the theme of freely choosing the sorrows as a life vacation is very acutely present in Mother Maria's writing. For example, in the first song of the poem, she writes about freely choosing the sorrows with no guarantees. Often, she represented as a spiral journey of challenges. She writes, "Your boat has long since left the shore, yet the new shore remains unseen. Once more you choose the sorrows of exile, only now among your own. The circle has closed, and yet you are at the start again." She writes about humility and reverence before the sorrows. And here, one of her languages of dichotomies comes out. And in this specific verse is the dichotomy of suffering. On the one hand, suffering, it is a comforting and yet striking at the same time. And she writes about the comforter, life-giving dove, who strikes with his sword, with her words. "And though suffering still threatens me, before suffering I bow low. When by his sword I am struck, by the comforter, the life-giving dove." She talks often about this double-edged sword, the sword of suffering and salvation. The sword penetrates one's being and brings suffering to it, and yet it offers a path to salvation. Therefore, when she talks about the sufferings and tribulations of this world, although they are severe and terrifying, she humbles herself before the sword of the Comforter, of the living dove, or the white-winged sparkling bird, as she calls it in her poem. The poem is penetrated with pain and nostalgia of endless visions from the motherland, and it constitutes the earthly sorrows for something that is lost. And of course, it also represents the tragic history of Russia, which is commemorated in the poem. Mother Maria vividly portrays a scene of tragedy and desolation, drawing a parallel between the harsh Russian winter and the cold indifference of its ruler towards the people. The poem also appears to depict violence and death, possibly alluding to the Russian Revolution. The contrast between the icy, unforgiving landscape and the smoldering fire and smoke suggests an atmosphere of underlying tension and conflict. The phrase in the poem, "frosty icy Tsar," may symbolically reference the Romanov dynasty, which was overthrown during the revolution. There is a chilling imagery reflecting the desolate state of a once beloved country. She represents Mother Russia as dead and yet being caught in a frenzied dance, a dance that is in fact her own funeral procession. Mother Maria writes, "A soldier to wake her up with the tip of his bayonet will tickle the sleeping one. He knows his craft well, and the dead will spring up startled, and the dead will still dance, scattering her grey locks. The funeral bell, they are laying mother to rest." There is an instinctive, animal-like existence represented in the poem in silence and forgetfulness. Mother Maria offers further reflections on the state of the people in exile, while their former motherland is in a state of desolation, and they are living in the thunder of turmoil and tribulations. She writes, "And for us, her remaining wolf cubs, to circle in the world and remain silent, and to forget that a brother is called a brother. After a quarter of the century, I draw conclusions. I listen to the thunderous rumbles." She represents and writes about the endless eschatological sorrow in her poem. The imagery reflects the devastation of civil war and the biblical theme of division, where families are torn apart by struggles, whether driven by political conviction or religious beliefs. The Russian people in exile, it seems, remain silent, forgetting their kinship ties. Mother Maria, reflecting on the quarter of a century of her observations, concludes that the thunder of the country's tribulation still echoes, and unfortunately her words are still very relevant and acute and sounding very, very much up to date, even today. In this way, she might be sharing with us the vision of a prophet. The enduring relevance of the saint's words are present today. Mother Maria not only describes the realities of her time, but also offers guidance on how to navigate them and discern the signs of the times. Her poetic gift flows from the heart, even when the ear fails to grasp the message. She writes, "The heart knows even when the ear cannot catch." In times of uncertainty, when nothing seems clear, she writes, "Неясно всё," she prophesies that much will soon be revealed. She represents and talks about theological anthropology and writes about the gifts of. She talks about the duality of human nature and explores it, emphasizing human collaboration, the synergy, in the healing of the suffering world. She writes, "Ask, plea, and you will receive the power to stop the blood, to lift the curse, to restore hearing to the deafening ear, and sight to the clouded eye. Beyond the shell of flesh, a fierce spirit, which is eternal, and at the same time has just been born. It has not been extinguished, in the gusts of the hurricane. Continuing her theological anthropology, she writes further about the synergetic collaboration of humanity in God's work. She writes that we only need to ask and plead to receive the necessary power to change the world for the better, to stop the blood, to lift the curse, to restore hearing to the deafening ear, and sight to the clouded eye. It seems that it is entirely within the human, the divine capacity of human nature, of each person to continue the healing work of Christ. We do not need to wait and rely solemnly on him. We simply need to ask and ask again, and it will be given to us. This is both our duty in response to the gift of the world and a continuation of Christ's work. In this turbulent and savage time, this calling becomes an urgent necessity. And as with all the voices of previous prophets, the message of Mother Maria is as relevant now as it was then. She enforces the encouragement through theological anthropology. She writes about a fierce spirit being encapsulated and in a way transcending beyond the fragile shell of human flesh. Though the flesh is weak and mundane, the spirit within it is eternal, which in its turn testifies to the transcendent potential of the very flesh in which it dwells. In this relatively simple rhyme of the poem, Mother Maria, in fact, manages to encapsulate the deep patristic teaching of the Orthodox fathers, such as Gregory of Nyssa, Maximus the Confessor, and Gregory the Great, and many others. And she further carries the torch of living tradition through her poetic verses. Another tasteful dichotomy that we find in her poem is the power of the prophetic message. Although, she writes, the spirit is eternal, it is also continuously being born. She emphasizes the crucial role of each person's freedom of will and the significance of their actions. Individuals, therefore, possess the real-time capability to sort of plug into the spiritual domain when they freely choose to ignite the spirit within themselves. In doing so, they begin their transformative and healing work that flows from this awakened spirit. Her third song is the most dramatic. It represents eschatological abandonment and desolation. She writes about Christ leaving churches and houses after 20 centuries of Christianity. She begins with the song with the following rhymes. He, Christ, lived among us. His seal lay on 20 centuries. All was in him. The universe reflected only him. Not so long ago, on a calm gray day, he departed from temples and squalid homes, alone, barefoot, with a bag, a cross, with fire. So she writes about 20 centuries of Christianity ending in desolation. She writes that it wasn't like this initially. The desert was filled with spirituality. She refers to the spiritual desert of pre-Christian existence. And the fights changed to prayers, or so it seems from the poem. But something changed when the 20th century cycle was finished. Unfortunately, according to Mother Maria, 20 centuries of Christianity ended in godlessness. She writes, the 2000-year cycle is complete. Wormwood grows where temples once rose. and the plow turns up the soil of cities. The consequence of human apostasy is the utter poverty, the picture of divine abandonment, and the consequence and the result of it are the days of sorrow. She writes, and the poor world has become poorer still, and bitter bread and foul-smelling seas are left. Inhabitable dwellings of people no longer exist. What good are places without a king? What is life to us now? The firstborn from the dead is gone from life, leaving the world and the altar behind. There is no longer an altar if there is no bloodless sacrifice on it. And let the artist in 100 years write about these days of sorrow, a world abandoned and lonely. Poetic vision of Mother Maria reflecting on the days of sorrow and the divine abandonment mourns, and the mourning and desolation she represents, penetrating the family ties. All living creatures, not only human beings, are empty nested. There is loss of hope and hopeless questions. She writes, a wolf runs through drifts of snow. She calls out to her cubs, but they are nowhere to be found. And a bird mourns over an empty nest. And people wander among the earthly roads. People's faces are impassive, impenetrable. The earthly bosom is to be trampled by their feet. They greedily divide the found morsels of someone else's bread. They won't rest, but hurry on to look. What is it left for us to look for now? What unknown marvels await us? What freedom and what losses? The experience of divine abandonment in the poem depicts people living without hope and without light. What is life to us now represents the question of despondency and reflects the mood, the heavy mood. The world became Christless. Christ has left it. He, in fact, is gone and left the world behind. And it seems like his departure is real. Hence the state of divine abandonment, which is so tangible that it is only the artists that are left to reflect on it, on these days of sorrow. This description of horror continues, depicting humans who wander aimlessly. They have the dehumanized faces, and they wander aimlessly, although they wander along earthly roads. But unfortunately, their faces are impassive. It seems like people breed total desolation, destroying the earth and spreading deceit and anarchy. Mother Maria writes about the new law for the world, the appearance of the suffering bird. After people ignored Christ's suffering and his sacrifice and the gift of his redemption, they are stuck in a vicious circle of suffering. And the suffering is amplified, as she writes. Nothing has changed. Blood, sweat, and festering sores on all earthly bodies. As it was, so it is, and the same concern, and there is no way, and in the heart a murky fear. Human faces are impenetrable. Only one thing is new. A suffering bird beats struggles in the sky, filling the world, and all who live in the world are struck by chills, and even it is not easy to cross oneself. Suffering bird is another vision of dichotomy. What is this bird doing? On the one hand, there is nothing new in the world, and yet here emerges an entirely new phenomenon, a suffering bird. On the one hand, the bird embodies suffering and evokes pity and sorrow, and yet the vision of it is chilling, so striking, so astonishing, that it becomes almost debilitating. The sight is so overwhelming that even the simplest religious gesture, like making the sign of the cross, feels nearly impossible. The bird's presence in the sky carries a profound ambiguity. In the Russian phrase "бьется в небесах", the verb "бьется" can mean both struggling and fighting. Is the bird merely struggling to stay aloft, battered by unseen forces, or is it engaged in an existential battle, resisting the weight of suffering imposed upon it? This duality sharpens the vision. Does suffering only weaken, or does it also embolden? The chill that emanates from this side is not merely a reaction, but an attack, an assault on the very core of those who behold it. The suffering bird, suspended between struggle and defiance, transforms into an emblem of something beyond mere pain, perhaps a prophetic warning, perhaps a symbol of endurance. Writing further and is exploring deeper the eschatological times, she represents the picture of which is signified by the appearance of the white bird. This white bird shows up in the beginning of the poem, and it represents and marks the final exodus. All living will be saved by beauty and divine freedom is the prophetic prophecy at the beginning of the poem, when Mother Maria writes, "I sense the approach of white wings. Yours, O radiant bird, you the living spirit among bones and veins. In answer to you, the soul of the people will sigh, a people who long lay as a lifeless body. Not human freedom, but yours alone, will transform the living through beauty on the threshold of the final exodus." She represents divine and human mission of this double-edged sword, which on the one hand pierces people like a cross, on the other offers a second baptism by fire. Mother Maria writes, "The double-edged sword has descended, that faithful one which pierced the Virgin's heart, and it is not meant to cut the flesh of people, but to be driven in as a cross. Yes, I know that the sword will be driven in as a cross, baptizing second time with fire, marking many faces with its seal." Mother Maria writes and elaborates on the concept of the sin, on the reality of the sin, and writes about it as a source of human and divine suffering. Through sin, people continue to place nails into the cross, becoming the source of ongoing divine suffering. The troubles and tribulations of the world stem from humanity casting away Christ, even from within their own churches. One crucifixion of the single person of the Trinity is not enough. People are now crucifying the Spirit as well. This painful repetition of the biblical narrative reveals a vicious circle of human desolation and sinfulness, predictable and yet profoundly disappointing in its manifestation of human hypocrisy. Humanity is caught in a cycle of reciprocating divine light only to draw away from it, embracing self-inflicted darkness and desolation. So Mother Maria writes about apocalyptic 3-day night darkness of human desolation with the following words. The 3-day night has approached us. The gift of grace is weighed on scales, the gift of grace only for a few. What is created from dust will be dust, and someone loudly hammers a nail into the crossbeam. And fear, the fear of blasphemy, concern for purity, and the horror of unforgivable blasphemy deadens the whole world, and deadly slumber covered the fire with a shroud of ashes. The ode of the prophet to the Spirit, suffering in the world, represents the pain of
It seems that Elena's computer is turned off. She said that this might happen, so let's just wait for her to rejoin. She should only be 5 minutes. Sorry. Elena, are you back?
Yes, apologies. The computer did what I was.
That's fine, don't worry. If you could.
Yeah, I'll carry on from where we left. Is it sharing?
Yes, just click from current slide.
Yeah, all done.
Okay, perfect.
So Mother Maria writes this ode to the suffering bird. Suffering in the world from the pain of unrecognized message of love. She writes, O life-giving Spirit, this pain were you looking for, O unrecognized message, a message of freedom, not accepted by people. Where can the white bird sit in the flood? Where to separate the wheat from the chaff? What can the flame eat in this world? Fly away from us, tormented bird. No one rushes to you. No one is used to you. You cannot achieve anyone's love. This ode to the Spirit represents, as I already said, the tragedy of unrecognized love, and it represents the dialogue between the prophet and the Spirit. When the evil doings of the people in the world obscured the light of the Spirit's work, much like ashes covering a flame, the prophet, and in this poem Mother Maria, mourns as the world, blind to its true essence, fails to acknowledge the boundless love, the love that God offers to it. The message, pure and selfless, is met with indifference. And in this rejection, the world experiences the deepest sorrow. The pain of the prophet is embodied in Mother Maria's words, who as a prophet releases a painful cry to the Spirit. A prophet casts the bird away out of love for it, out of love for the Spirit, seeing how the bird is rejected and, even worse, has no place to land among people dwelling in darkness and death, unwilling or unable to turn to the light. This is the darkness of human reciprocity, or the lack of it, the rejection of the divine to the point of the second crucifixion. Yet divine light continues to pour forth, and the blessings are offered regardless. The Spirit's determination to enlighten the people remains. But the tragedy is that it fights for love that it constantly rejected. The divine love of the Spirit is not appreciated, and the message goes unrecognized. Freedom has not been accepted, and the Spirit endures the pain of this rejection. Further unraveling her apocalyptic report on the tragedy of the human-divine relationship, Mother Maria further elaborates on the second sacrifice, the sacrifice of the Spirit. She writes, "The dove's chest is not white today. Bloody stains has reddened on it, and blood drips from the high forehead, and the sound of wings are not so clear to the ear. The single Golgotha mountain suddenly grew and became immense. 2,000 years have disappeared in an instant. They grab the bird, the herald of freedom. A cry is heard in the huge crowd. Crucify her, enough." The second crucifixion of God repeated. And now it affects all of us. Mother Maria writes, "I am in the crowd, and you, another and all. All are afflicted. Everyone is part of the crowd, surrounded by the harsh reality of the world, once again crucifying God. The pain of the author lies in the heart-wrenching realization of the near future of divine attempts to offer sacrificial love to the people. It was done by Jesus when he came and the world rejected him, crucifying him on the cross. But this rejection is not a single event in the history. It is a reoccurring pattern. Now the Spirit, in its love and sacrifice, is being crucified again. This is the tragedy. The people can only seem to follow the same narrative, the rejection and crucifixion of the divine. The sacrificial love of God, though offered again and again, is met with indifference and rejection. It is as if the painful cycle in the only human divine narrative that humanity can grasp. The divine love is perpetually sacrificed, and yet, tragically, humanity continues to fail in recognizing and receiving it. And yet, towards the end, there is a sudden hope in the hopeless state, and the prophetic awakening from the vision that Mother Maria writes about. Suddenly, in the sky, the pre-dawn flowers, suddenly silver, blinding in the middle of the night, the heavenly canopy suddenly opened, the archangel trumpet roars to us. I don't dare anymore. There is no fear in my heart, but still I don't dare. An effort is needed to come to my senses. The usual circle of things. I'm in the room, and outside the wall the dust is crushed. It rained recently. From the northern border to the southern, the foretold leader shepherds the people. This sudden hope and awakening from the horrible vision represents, although a timid, hopeful state, when there perhaps could not be any hope left, when the only desire is to escape, run away from the atrocities of the human condition, human stain that is left continuously on the divine initiative of sacrificial love. This vision of hope is so gentle, like a pre-dawn flowers, in the face of the horror of what was happening, that it almost doubtful that the hope is real. It is almost as if the human consciousness invents hope in the midst of the hopeless situation to survive the vision and to escape the horrific reality of human apostasy. The dichotomy of total darkness and despair of the apocalyptic vision in the third song is surprising, if it follows the typology of 3 days of crucifixion, burial, and resurrection. However, it is the day of the Spirit, which means the day of the Comforter and the one that pierces us with a double-edged sword of sorrow, revealing the state of darkness in this world. The day of the Spirit is the day of our judgment as well as the day of our brutal awakening. So, contemplating further on the double-edged cross and the suffering and the salvation dynamic, we can perhaps ponder on suffering of Christ on the cross and him offering salvation to the universe. And yet the suffering of the Spirit, again, the Spirit being crucified as well, embracing the suffering for or because of the people. The suffering of Christ led to salvation for the people, but the lack of suffering of people for Christ led to the people sinning, turning away from Christ, and inflicting more suffering upon themselves, which in turn led to the Spirit being crucified, thus embracing and invoking the cross of salvation once again. Duhov Den, the Day of the Spirit. This brings deeper understanding of why in the Orthodox Church people kneel on the Day of the Spirit, the following Monday after Pentecost, as penitence seems to be the only appropriate way of addressing our state of affairs with God. If only after the 40 days, 40 festive days after Christ's resurrection and joyful celebration of Easter and Pentecost. God is with us, but divine caressing of us is no longer gentle. and perhaps we were living in illusion that it ever was. Divine touch is coarse. It is a double-edged sword that penetrates our heart with fire. Sorrow and tears and suffering is what it brings, but it is a sorrow of sin being squeezed out of our routine existence, or rather a suffering of a dead soul being awakened by force of divine intervention, and the tears of restored sight beholding the pitiful state of a human being lacking God and missing Christ. The autobiographical poem of Mother Maria is a cry of the prophet in the desert, a scream of despair in the midst of the human horrific times. She had not yet accepted her martyrdom of salvation, but she was almost foreseeing it, being prepared for it, testing herself. She remained true to the spirit of sacrificial love when she accepted martyrdom in the camp in 1945. In conclusion, it is a no effort to realize how the words of the poem remain current and acute today. The double-edged sword of sanctity, it pierces our hearts and minds and split it open, revealing our painful state and shake us with their vision, so that we awake from our dreamy state of routine and mundane indifference, or perhaps a delusional comfort of our surviving strategies. It would be easier to distill a clear message of hope and comfort from Mother Maria's poem. And yet her message is harsh, her visions are brutal. She lived her life uncompromisingly, and with this steered a lot of discomfort around herself. And yet her words and her visions, her theology, is for the purpose of salvation of all, for the message of Christ and along his footprints. So let us take heed and try to discomfort ourselves with her presence in order to ultimately make this world a better place. Thank you very much.